Hi, I'm Arnie Gundersen from Fairewinds. Today I'd like to introduce a video by Goddard. But before I do that, I want to talk about beer. Now that's not the stuff you drink, but it's B-E-I-R. And it stands for the biological effects of ionizing radiation. And it's a report from the National Academy of Sciences. What got me thinking about this were two disturbing news stories out of Japan. The first story comes from NHK, which is the major Japanese radio television station. And the story reports that in Fukushima Prefecture, very, very high levels of radioactive cesium has been found in male cedar flowers. That's the tip of the cedar apparently is loaded with cesium. The data indicates that it's about 250,000 disintegrations per second in a kilogram of these cedar flowers. Now, that's pretty serious because, of course, in the spring, the flowers will bud and that radioactive cesium will go airborne again. Now, what got my attention, though, was the Japanese response to that. And here's what NHK said. The agency reports this is not a great health hazard, as it is only about 10 times what a person would be exposed to from normal background in Tokyo. Now, there's all sorts of assumptions that go into that calculation, but to my mind, when you release 250,000 disintegrations per second of cesium into the air when the flowers burst, that should get public health attention. The second story is also from Japan, and this one from Japan Times, where radioactive grasshoppers have been detected in Fukushima Prefecture. Now, the grasshoppers are contaminated to the tune of 4,000 disintegrations per second in a kilogram of grasshoppers. Now, why is this important? The Japanese eat radioactive grasshoppers with their beer. Now, the story goes on to say this. The scientists think it's safe to eat the bugs because they're usually in snack-sized portions, crunchy soy-marinated locusts, enjoyed with a cold mug of beer. Now, I think drinking beer is fine, but when the bug you're eating has 4,000 disintegrations per second of cesium, that should be a concern to public health officials. That gets me to the issue of beer, biological effects of ionizing radiation. The beer report shows that radiation exposure and cancer rate are linear. What that means is it's proportional. The more radiation you get, the more cancer you're likely to get. The less cancers come from lower doses. So if this is dose and this is cancer, the line goes up and down in a straight line. That's what beer says. It's called the LNT, linear no threshold approach. And what that means in beer is this. If somebody's exposed to 100 rem, that's 1 sievert, the chances of getting cancer are 1 in 10. If you cut that in 10, so if somebody gets 10 rem, that's 100 millisieverts, the chances of getting cancer are 1 in 100. Going down one more, if you get 1 rem of radiation, or about 10 millisieverts, the chances of a cancer are about 1 in 1,000. Now in Japan, the Japanese government is allowing people to go back into these radiation zones when the radiation exposure is 2 rem. What that means is that they're willing to say that your chance of getting cancer are 1 in 500 if you go back into these areas that are presently off limits. And the exposure levels are 2 rem or 20 millisieverts in a year. But it's worse than that. The number that we're using in the beer report is for the entire population, old people and young. And old people are going to die of something else before cancer gets to them, whereas young people have rapidly dividing cells and they live a longer time, so they're more likely to get cancer. So if you go into the beer report and you look at table 12D, you'll see that young women have it 5 times that number chance of getting cancer than the population as a whole. So young girls in the Fukushima prefecture are going to get 5 times the exposure they would get from 2-rem. That means about 1 in 100 young girls is going to get cancer as a result of the exposure in Fukushima prefecture. And that's for every year they're in that radiation zone. If you're in there for 5 years, it's 5 out of 100 young girls will get cancer. Now, the Beer report only addresses cancer, and of course there's other effects of radiation that are not included in beer, so it's actually worse than that. 2 more items. The first is that the Beer report does not address hot particles. Now, we've been over that extensively on the site, and you'll see that imbibing it, a kid gets radioactive cesium on their hands and they swallow it, or breathing it in is not included in the Beer report. And the last piece brings us over to Ian Goddard's video. And that's this assumption by the Japanese and the International Atomic Energy Agency that at some point this radiation is really so hard to measure it doesn't count anymore. Well, the data indicates that just the opposite is happening. And that brings me to Ian Goddard's video. I'll be back at the end of the video to try to summarize everything we've talked about today.
Following the Fukushima nuclear disaster, the Japanese government raised the level of allowable radiation exposure from 1 to 20 millisieverts per year, even for children.
On April 19th, the Ministry of Education, Culture, Sports, Science, and Technology announced that the amount of radiation a child can be exposed to in 1 year is 20 millisieverts.
Officials proclaim that 20 millisieverts per year is safe, but is it? In this video, we'll test the official claim of safety against established radiobiological science. The same science upon which the United States National Academy of Sciences predicts that 20 millisieverts of radiation will not only cause cancers all across Fukushima, but will primarily kill women and children. In this video, we'll also test the official claim of safety against recently published research, such as the largest study of nuclear workers ever conducted. Comprising over 400,000 workers from 15 countries, the study found increased cancer mortality among nuclear workers exposed to an average of 2 millisieverts per year. That's just 1/10 of the allegedly safe 20 millisieverts per year allowed in Fukushima. In this video, we'll see that the public is being misled by governments and major media into a false sense of safety regarding nuclear fallout, obstructing the ability of citizens to be fully informed so that we can make sound decisions that direct our democracies to safe energy futures. So stay tuned as we cover all that and more. The United States National Academy of Sciences is a logical resource to consult about the state of radiation science. And the Academy regularly publishes reports on low-dose radiation risks. The reports are based on decades of epidemiological and radiobiological research, from which risk-predicting models are built. The Academy's most recent report provides both raw data and instructions so that you can apply their risk models to a wide range of exposure scenarios. We can therefore find the cancer risk of 20 millisieverts. This is the Academy's data table for estimated cancer cases caused by 100 millisieverts of radiation, stratified by age and segregated by sex. Highlighted in yellow are the predicted number of cases for all cancers per 100,000 persons. Immediately we can see that the risk of cancer uniformly decreases as age increases for both males and females. In other words, children are most vulnerable to radiation. Plotting these data yields this graph. This cancer risk graph keeps the shape irrespective of its dose. This shape is therefore the face of radiation-induced cancer risk across the human lifespan. Following the Academy's instructions on scaling the model to specific doses, the y-axis is recalibrated to the predicted cancer cases caused by the allegedly safe 20 millisieverts. And here in turn are recalibrations for 10 and for 2 millisieverts. According to the Academy, there is no harmless dose of radiation. So, obviously 20 millisieverts is not safe. But what's most remarkable is that children, and most especially girls, are the most at risk of radiation-induced cancer. In fact, girls are almost twice as vulnerable as same-aged boys, and a 5-year-old girl is 5 times, and an infant female 7 times more vulnerable than a 30-year-old man. These data from the National Academy of Sciences are freely available to all major media and government officials. Yet rather than informing the public of the actual state of radiation science and the real risks of nuclear power, they lead us instead to believe that 20 millisieverts of radiation is either safe or its effects are a complete mystery.
Residents traveled to Tokyo to protest after the government loosened safety limits, despite the fact that the long-term impact of low-dose radiation is unknown. The long-term impact of low-dose radiation is unknown.
Even worse than a failure to inform, major media lead the public to believe that scientific models of low-dose radiation risk, such as we've just reviewed, don't even exist. Yet outside the media's cocoon of blissful ignorance, science marches forward, further characterizing the risks of low-dose radiation. And the flow of incoming evidence, published since the Academy's last report in 2006, suggests that the Academy's risk model is either accurate or may underestimate risk. In 2007, the largest study ever conducted on occupational low-dose radiation exposure was published. The study contained over 400,000 nuclear industry workers from 15 countries. The study found a significant relation between radiation dose and cancer mortality. The average period of nuclear worker employment in the study was 10.5 years. And the average dose accumulated over those years was 19.4 millisieverts. This implies an average annual dose of 1.85 millisieverts per year. To get a more accurate estimate of the average annual dose, this data table, showing the average cumulative dose and years of employment for each country, is useful. From these data, we find that the average annual dose for the whole cohort was 1.95 millisieverts per year, rounding off to 2 millisieverts per year. The data provided by the study also allow calculation of the median annual dose of the whole cohort, which was lower still, at merely 0.45 or 1/2 of a millisievert per year. So the representative dose rate among the nuclear workers in the study was at most 1/10 of the 20 millisieverts per year allowed in Fukushima. So with an allowance of 20 millisieverts per year, Fukushiman children may receive up to 10 times the dose rate associated with increased cancer among adult nuclear workers. To get a sense of the distribution of exposures over the cohort, 90% of the workers in the study received cumulative doses under 50 millisieverts over their entire period of employment, which overall was 10.5 years on average. So dividing 50 millisieverts by 10.5 years suggests that the dose rate for most of the workers was probably below 5 millisieverts per year.